Welcome to a special series called The Global Crisis Monitor, featured on the Treasury Update podcast. Thank you for joining. On this episode of the Global Recovery Monitor series, Craig Jeffery and Alexa Cook of Strategic Treasure explore Period 17's results from the COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. This new data reveals surprising shifts in voluntary staff departures and a three-way tie in top concerns, including staff safety protocols, access to adequate liquidity, and direct financial impact to businesses. Listen in on the latest economic and health outlook updates reported by the Treasury and finance community. Welcome back to the podcast, Craig and Alexa.
Thanks, Meredith. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've had our last one.
So we have now completed 17 survey periods in the Global Recovery Monitor. Craig, will you start us off with some of the top headlines?
Yeah, this last month there was quite a few headlines. The level of concern about jobs remains, that's one. Those that are voluntarily leaving the job, it's a really significant portion of companies identified that as an issue, and far more women than men are leaving the job voluntarily. That was a second big and item and new to our survey. Perhaps not a surprise. The third point is, I think we've seen a lot of spike in COVID cases, and this reversed a 6-month run of positive health concerns, and it became very negative there. The majority expect lockdowns to be reimposed, or lockdowns were already reimposed. And we have this continuing view that my company is better than my industry in terms of outlook. And the COVID death rate as a top concern diminished, and it's the fourth highest concern now in one of our forced ranking lists. So death rate has diminished significantly. And don't ask us about business travel. That's not looking good.
I can also touch on some of those economic highlights too. So both the 3-month and the 12-month outlook have shifted. The 3-month outlook has shifted negatively and is just at over 4.5 months for equilibrium. And in the last period, we saw this marker report the best response we've seen yet. So this period's responses are a bit more gloom than on the 3-month outlook.
We regularly review 4 areas of impact. Any changes to the long-running positivity of the past month?
Yeah, unfortunately. So this past month, we saw a break from at least 6 months of positive period over period views of the impact of COVID on our businesses, our family, responses to things. So 3 or 4 remain positive on a period over period basis, but 1 went negative, and this is the first time that occurred in that 6-month time range. And this had to do with the impact on our family, our community. So the concern, ostensibly related to the spiking cases, has increased the concern there. And so that dipped below the 5-point equilibrium level there, and that's been a long time since that happened.
In this survey, we have cycled through some new questions, one of them asking if respondents had experienced staff voluntarily leaving the workforce or reducing hours. How did respondents answer this question this period?
So I know Craig kind of mentioned it in the beginning during our headlines, but staff is voluntarily reducing their hours or leaving. And we are seeing that in more than a quarter of companies. And of these employees that are reducing their hours, this is significantly more women than men. It's about just under 15% of the workforce that's kind of cutting back is women. So that's an interesting observation we've noticed.
Well, and it's, and as Alexa said, it's more than a quarter of companies, like 27% of companies are experiencing this voluntary staff reduction or leaving, people leaving. And it's, we think about the economic impact on this type of survey, but there's also this, impact on families, impacts on, working from home has a social and an emotional impact too, and so people are coping in different ways, and it's that's no small number that over a quarter of organizations saw staff leaving voluntary basis. I don't know what the normal trend is over a 8-9 month period of time, but this seems significant to us.
Were there any changes to the top concerns from the prior period?
This is one of the forced rank questions we have. We have 8 items, and we usually put a chart together for those that read the report. You can see how this has changed over time. We highlight which one comes in first place, receives the most first place votes. When people force rank these 8 items, what comes up first? And this period, we had 3 tie for first place votes. That's really rare that it matches up exactly, but staff safety protocols, access to adequate liquidity, and direct financial impact all had the most first place votes. So staff safety protocols has cycled up into the top couple a few times. Access to adequate liquidity and direct financial impact are almost always in the top 3, and often 1 and 2. But if you look at that, the average winner, if you look at the average of placing, these items first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, or all the way through 8th, the direct financial impact of the business is number 1 on average. That's the most highly weighted on average. And then the second most highly weighted on average, recession in the regions we operate. So that took number 2. So while there's a lot of top level concerns for those 3, direct financial impact and recession were key. The second forced rank that we had, that second forced ranking section we had, if we take the averages, COVID response rate was number 1. So how we respond to COVID, whether it's a lockdown or changing business or whatever's taking place there in people's minds for the response was number 1. Civil unrest in North America still up there is number 2. Elections hit number 3. And obviously we think that might change since we're past elections. And then 4th place was the COVID death rate. So certainly a lot of concerns about how we're responding to COVID. And then we saw in earlier questions about COVID health, but the COVID death rate is pretty far down. It's number 4 now in that forced rank concerns. And in terms of changes in top concerns, we had some concerns about the job too, Meredith, and Alexa, bring you in on this too. Those that were extremely more concerned about their job position was almost a third, just under 33% were extremely more concerned about their job position.
How are the time estimates for health and financial normalcy looking?
So the inflection point has pushed out a bit from the prior period, from about 4 months to 5 months. And as Craig's kind of mentioned, the peak death rate is now at around 2.5 months, which is a little bit of a decrease actually from the prior period's 4 months. And then the health outlook for the extension of time until COVID-19 becomes a minor health issue has actually stayed consistent at about 11.5 months. So that was the same as last period. And then lastly, the financial normalcy in individual businesses came in at about 10 to 10.5 months, which is also the same as the prior period.
So each period I typically ask you about AR and fiscal policy. Any changes on the negative outlooks here?
Organization's future liquidity position, which has been a key barometer, has been quite positive for many months now. Over 5 months, there was only one period where it dipped down after we got past the early stages of the trough, which was brought about by COVID and the shutdown and the concerns there. It's still positive over the past month. The net is a little over 17% positive. Those that are positive versus those that are negative. Fully 57% saw their liquidity position sit in the same position. As we look at some of those different areas on corporate liquidity and the sources and challenges to that, on the net negative basis, we had accounts receivable was a net negative 15%. So those positive minus negative resulted in 15% negative, and fiscal policy actions and inactions topped that slightly with a net of about 16% negative. The other 4 areas that were measured were all a net positive from about, the numbers in front of me, but I think it was about 8 to about 18%. So most of them were positive, but AR certainly was negative. Fiscal policy, those have been the two that were most negative.
Before we wrap up the episode, what do we need to be thinking about for the weeks ahead?
Yeah, I think some of the questions that we've layered in for the monitor that's just out now, we're asking about other elements of what's impacting the view. We've changed up one of our forced ranking concerns since we moved past the elections, and we're looking at things like other fiscal policy type actions. So there's other questions there. We've put in some, I'll call it social aspects of what people are thinking about. But I think the key is, as we look at how these are impacting the various employees in finance and Treasury, whether it's extended lockdown, and then the economic impact on business and as we see recovery and coming out of it. So we've cycled in a few questions that are fan favorites from before, and we've added a couple more as well. And again, it takes 5 minutes to complete this survey. And this survey now runs in 2-month cycles. So we're doing this cycle and one more, which will get us just over a year of running through the Global Recovery Monitor.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for this insightful update on the COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. I look forward to catching up with you both in the new year on the latest results as we continue to monitor the global state of recovery. We wanted to encourage you to take the Global Crisis Monitor Survey repeatedly while it's live. It runs from Wednesday to Tuesday every week. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and follow the links. Add your voice and insight so that as a profession, we can take positive and knowledgeable steps to move our organizations and nations forward. Invest 5 minutes each week at treasurycoalition.com and get great information and insights while helping our profession and organizations.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.